There we go. Okay, there's a storm brewing up outside for some of us too, so just be aware. We may lose some connectivity. Hopefully I won't lose it. All right, with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guest. Ashlee George is now the director of the Restorative Justice Project or program at Impact Justice. They are located out in Oakland, California, and as is Ashlee. So we welcome her. And Erica Washington is actually here in the DMV in DC, I think, right? Okay, so her colleague here. And you all can say more about yourselves and your roles as you need to. But I'm going to turn this over to Ashlee for maybe around 15, or if it takes 20, that'll be okay, minutes of your presentation about this work. I hope most of us have had a chance to look at the various documents and documentation of your program. So hopefully we'll be able to be quick studies on this. And, so there's some questions that I had to start off with, which is, describing the program, how it's been unfolding in the different locations, what makes a site successful, what are the critical ingredients for your model and for the organizations that provide the practices. And we have a question also about whether it can work for adults as well. And you and I talked about this a little bit. So a couple other questions, but let's just go ahead and let me be quiet and let you get started, okay? And let me know if you need to share your screen or anything like that. I can.
Okay, I will need to share a screen.
Okay, I've just now set it up, so you should be able to do that.
Okay, I guess I can start sharing the screen now. Lovely. So once again, thank you for having me here. Really, really excited, and just going around and listening to what everyone hopes to get out of this session is definitely a highlight and a bright moment in my day. And I'm gonna have to use I pass this to you with kindness. I'm definitely gonna have to use that with other projects, so that was good. I love that. Yeah, so I'm Ashlee George. I'm from Oakland, California. So I'm based in our Oakland office at Impact Justice. We do innovation and research around criminal justice and criminal justice reform. And the work that Eric and I focus on is the Restorative Justice Project, and specifically our approach or our model to restorative justice diversion. And so we provide training and we provide technical assistance, and that's to support sites in creating and developing a program that's unique to their community, that supports the needs of people who've been harmed, that supports people who've caused harm, community members, family, so coming together and addressing how to make things as right as possible after serious harm has occurred. So this is one of our quotes: "Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations." And so this is by Dr. Mae Jamison, first African-American female astronaut. And just to give a little overview, so I know you all have done the reading, you've been deep into restorative justice. We're going to do a little bit of high-level restorative justice, just the context set, and then we'll kind of go into the model. And then afterwards, we'll do, Leanne, let me know, we're going to do questions at the end for folks if they have different questions. And I'll do my best to weave in from the conversation that we've had before some of the questions that have come up. And then, Erica, do you want to introduce yourself now?
Sure, I'll say something really quickly. Hi, everyone. Like I said, I'm excited to be here. I am in the DMV. That storm is brewing out where I am as well. I came to Impact Justice after working as a capital defense attorney in Texas, Virginia, and North Carolina. And while I did that work in North Carolina, I helped to develop a program that diverted adults to a restorative process. So I know that that's a topic of particular interest to this group. And I'm excited to be here to bring this presentation and to be here for questions and answers. Yeah, And with that, I will pass it back over to you, Ashlee.
All right, lovely. All right. So when we think about restorative justice, I always talk about restorative justice being about relationships. How do we build relationships? How do we sustain them? And then what do we do when something happens? Like, so how do we mend relationships? And if we're thinking about it in the sense of relationships, crime is a violation of people and their interpersonal relationships. So even if folks have never met each other before and an incident happens, at that moment, a relationship is formed. And they may never encounter each other again, but there's a need that arises. And from that, a relationship is developed. And so from there, violations create obligations. And then it's central to going through and looking at whose responsibility is it to make it as right as possible by the person who's been harmed. Okay, so you may have seen these questions. I can't see a ref, like raise your hand if you've seen these questions. Okay, y'all have seen these questions? Great. So we have the legal approach, right? And so the questions that are asked are what law was broken, who broke it, how should they be punished? In the restorative approach, the question asks who has been harmed, what do they need, and whose obligation is it to meet those needs? And just wanted, if someone can just turn off their mute really quick and like shout out, what's the like one of the differences that you see in the questions? It's a key thing that stands out to you. Oopsies.
People focused.
People focused on which approach?
Restorative justice.
Right. So it's centered around the people, the human, and the needs. And I think someone mentioned in there like the hope for creating a system that is actually responsive to humans. And so with that, one of the questions is like, well, why is restorative justice so successful? And it's because we actually center the people and their needs. And so we'll come back to this point later, but this is one of the things that makes it these the most successful, is it centering around exactly what group you're trying to support and address. Thank you for that, Candace. All right. Just to give some context of like, what's the process? What happens? So in this specific case, we're looking at responsible youth. We are also working with other jurisdictions to expand to transitional age youth. So, but for this purpose, we'll start with responsible youth. So responsible youth causes harm, right? That case is then referred to a community-based organization. From there, a coordinator facilitates a process and prepares everyone involved. So that means the community-based, an RJ facilitator will meet with the young person, the responsible person. They will meet with the person who's harmed. They will meet with family. They will meet with support people. They will ask questions of what happened? What were you thinking? How did you feel for the person harmed? Like, how did it feel when you found out about your car being stolen? Or how did it feel when you may have been assaulted? Like, what were the thoughts that came to your mind? What questions do you have now? And they go through a series of prep meetings to support the person who's the person harmed, feel like they have agency in the process and feel like they can ask the questions or they can state their needs, and to also support the person who caused the harm in taking full responsibility. And so everyone's brought together in this process. They have the conference. At the conference, a plan is developed to make it as right as possible and to repair the harm. And the way that they repair the harm is specifically to the incident, right? And so if I had a situation where a young person sold someone's car, the person had a whole full day, like this is the one day they had away from work, they weren't able to they were gonna build a garden box for their family, they weren't able to do one of their tasks. And one of the ways that the young person made it right to them was by helping them build this garden, the planters, because that's something that they were going to do prior to the event happening. So you want to make it specific to the harm. And that's also another thing that makes this process really unique. And then with making it right, so we make it right to the person who's been harmed, make it right to the family, make it right to the community members, like maybe someone's witnessed this, and then also the young person or the person who's caused the harm, they're going to make it right to themselves. And then they complete this step, and they they complete that part of the restorative process, the plan piece, and then the case is closed. And this process usually takes from 3 to 9 months, depending upon the different, different people and the needs that arise. And so when people look at like, does this work? How's this worked? One recent, this is one of our, we have another report that's out, it's on our website with Alameda County that you may have seen, but this is some more recent data from San Francisco County. And if you look at the recidivism, and this was with a randomized control test. So the recidivism for restorative justice diversion was 13% compared to 53% for young people who went through the traditional approach. And so this is really significant because in this case, the district attorney who was referring cases to the community-based organization put every person was, they would make the decision to charge this case. And if they were going to charge it into restorative justice, it was sent to a computer to be selected either for the restorative process or the traditional approach. I mean, and with doing randomized control testing, for me, it pulls at my heartstrings. I mean, so if it was this good, that means the young people who went through the traditional process could have actually probably really benefited from this, as well as the people who were impacted or the people who harmed from this as well. Yeah, and then with if we look at cost, so this is the amount that it costs to detain a young person for a year in San Francisco County compared to the restorative process, which is about $5,000. It's a little bit more expensive now, given the cost of living in the city, but yes. Oh, and then the other thing is that even of the young people who did recidivate, the 13%, it took them a lot longer to recidivate versus the young people who went through the traditional approach. So it was after maybe a year and a half, they recidivated versus immediately after. And so when thinking about, we talked about earlier, who's the process centered around? It's centered around humans, it's centered around and is oriented around the people who caused the harm. With our data, it says that 91% of people who've gone through the process would recommend this process to someone and felt that it was beneficial. And these are the different places that we are excited to be in partnership with, that we're in community with. Another, around the question of how do you make it work in different places? What makes it successful is that we have relationships with folks in deep relationships, and we trust the wisdom that people have in their communities to decide how and what the program or this process will look. And so we have our set of elements, which Erica will go into so far, and I think y'all have read about them. But it's really it's the community who makes it their own, and that's part of the success. That's part of the special ingredient that you can't, that it just has to be that we support, and we lean upon the wisdom of people from their community to know what they need. And so these are a few places that we're working with. All right, Erica.
All right. Yeah. So as Ashlee said, I'm going to speak a bit about our core elements. Now, the ones that are listed right now have largely been addressed, and I have a suspicion that you all have a good understanding of what about restorative justice requires it to be oriented around people harmed, to be strength-based, meaning that we really focus on what is right with you, not what is wrong with you, and we do not aim to have one size fits all. We really shy away from programs that always look for community service hours as how, what we assign to someone who's done harm. We really want you to talk about what you love about yourself, what you find strong in yourself, and then to actually help you strengthen that and divert you and offer you programs and resources that really play to your strengths and what you already like about yourself. So we, again, aim to be oriented around the people harmed, strengths-based. All of this work is rooted in relationships. As Ashlee said, that is the absolute core of restorative justice. And we always ensure that we protect confidentiality, and we really utilize memorandum of understanding where we lay out the terms of the agreement between the community-based organization and the district attorney's office, where we make sure that both sides fully understand what confidentiality looks like. We like to say that this is pretty much asking people to do the absolute opposite of Miranda, right? Like, tell me everything, say everything. We want to know, and that is how we're going to heal and how we're going to move forward. So these 4 that just appeared are actually the ones I'm going to focus a bit more on right now. These are ones that we always like to flesh out. We really believe all 8 ultimately are core to this model and to why we see success, the success that Ashlee just spoke to in more detail. But I'm going to first start with that first one right there on the right, which is that we designed this process to address racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile and criminal legal system. So we ask these 2 questions, right? What are youth of color being arrested for, and where are they being arrested? And so we do this because youth pre-diversion programs, and I'm using that because that's my understanding of how things work there in Arlington. So youth diversion programs, youth pre-diversion programs so often fail to reach the communities most impacted by the system. And we see that time and time again. So therefore, keeping racial and ethnic disparities in the forefront of how we implement the program is essential. And we use the zip codes and offense types for which youth of color are disproportionately incarcerated to inform program eligibility. I think it's worth also noting, ultimately we're in the business, and I know all of you as well are looking to be, if not are already in the business of addressing harm. And this is what we believe needs to happen so that this program does not inadvertently create harm. So we keep this central to how we implement this program and this model of restorative justice diversion. If you can take me to the next one, Ashlee. So focus exclusively on pre-charge diversion, or I guess pre-diversion diversion in Arlington. So we really believe that the greater the system involvement, the greater potential for the system to do harm. So whether that looks like collateral consequences from formal charges being filed and being on someone's record, whether that's because a participant has to leave work or find childcare for a court appearance or appearances, or as we see in some places where restorative justice is folded into a probation plan, and then all of the little technical probation errors that so often youth violate or the errors that they make ultimately result in someone losing the right to participate in restorative justice diversion. And that is something, when we see it happen, that also is a new injury to the survivor who is looking to participate in this restorative process as well. So we really, for that and many other reasons, I always like to, as a former defense attorney, right? I mean, even anything that looked like my client at making an admission was terrifying. And so even just the messiness that comes from RJ not happening as upstream as possible, but instead seeing the system kind of grab at and have some level of, inappropriate control over this process really does damage and undermines the success that we, being a pre-charge diversion program, see in our process. Next, we really structure this model to prevent net widening in the juvenile and criminal legal system. So cases diverted to a restorative justice diversion program should only be cases that would have resulted in the young person being incarcerated or placed on probation if charged. We do not want to increase the number of cases that have system involvement because of the existence of a program. So this is really not the right program for low-level offenses, and this absolutely factors into why we see the success that we see. Restorative justice is most effective for serious crimes that have a clear, identifiable person harmed. We want participants, and I think this is kind of intuitive, right? We want participants to connect what they did to the emotional impact on the survivor, right? We all understand how terrifying it is or must be to have your home broken into while your child's asleep in the other room or whatnot. And that is a key ingredient to the success that we are seeing with our program, is that we are working with high-level serious cases with a clear identifiable person harmed. And last, I just want to quickly note, this is an intense process. And when the intensity of an intervention is disproportionate to the harm, it can actually lead to an increase in recidivism. So asking a young person or a person harmed to invest months of their time and emotional energy into this process really cannot be taken lightly. And yeah, I guess that's all I want to say for that one. So yes, created and held by community and community-based organizations. So restorative justice of any form really must be born in community. It really can't be brought to a community. So that's why, you know, seeing all of your faces doing this work, that is how restorative justice is supposed to kind of come to the surface and bloom. Being held by community for us means that a restorative justice diversion process functions fully outside, to the extent humanly possible, of the juvenile and criminal legal systems. So cases are facilitated by trained facilitators, not by police, not by probation officers, not by prosecutors or other employees of the institutions. And we do this because we want to utilize the incredible wisdom and knowledge that Ashlee mentioned, right? The expertise that communities already have for addressing the issues that impact them and promoting healing. And I just really quickly, you know, that allows us to work with organizations with decades of experience resolving conflict without relying on the system, right? Like RISE and Contra Costa County, they've been working with youth for 15 years. And through working with youth, you learn how to resolve conflict with youth and not rely on the system. So how do we take that expertise that the community already has and use it to build, implement, and run a successful restorative justice diversion program? And so that's why we hold this as central to our model. So yes, thank you. So we wanted to highlight those elements because it's important, you know, really when speaking about restorative justice models, to understand where those models actually kind of fall on a continuum from fully restorative to really just not restorative. And so Howard Zehr, I don't know if anyone has heard of Howard Zehr, but he wrote some of the early texts in the academic field on restorative justice, and he provides a helpful way to think through kind of this continuum. So we've adapted it, and you can see it on this slide. I'm not going to read everything, but I just want to pull out, you know, an example that a fully restorative model focuses on addressing harms, needs, and causes for all involved. It maintains an awareness of power. There are ways that we see restorative justice being done that really don't fall towards the fully restorative side of this continuum. So we just wanted to uplift that, and I can just take us, we're done now. I know that we've definitely taken our 15 to 20, but briefly, we felt it important to just name some of the ways in which those in the community and community partners can play a role in this work. Of course, as I already noted, community-based organizations are the organizations that run this program. And so they would receive training in order to facilitate cases. And we at Impact Justice offer that training. And then just all of the ways you can support plans that the youth come up with in order to make things as right as possible. And that takes a community that has bought into this and wants to play a role in this work. I'm not gonna, I think I'll just keep going. And then here, systems partner, here is a list also of some ways in which you participate in the implementation of and the success of this program. And if you just go to the next one, Ashlee, that's pretty much just summarizing what the other slide said. And so with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening, and let's get to questions.
All right, thank you, Erica and Ashlee, really appreciate this. So what we're gonna do next is do a round. We've done this before, where what we'll do is we'll use our speaking order and collect up questions that you have. And rather than Ashlee and Erica answering them one at a time, we'll just go do the whole round, collect up questions. If somebody's already asked your question or you don't have a question, feel free to pass. And that will leave more time for answering. And then once we've gone all the way around, we'll ask Ashlee and Erica to answer questions. This way, I think sometimes the questions clump in themes and it's easier. So with that, I'm going to go ahead, skipping Ashlee and Erica, because if they have questions for themselves, that's their thing. So I'm going to pass with mindfulness to Lucretia.
Okay. I don't know, it's not really necessarily a question, but just more information on the, Erica was talking about the net widening, and then we're talking about felony and high-level misdemeanor cases only, or kids that would result in incarceration or probation. I know in Arlington County, our moderate risk cases, you know, most of our cases go on probation. So I guess I wanted more reference to the type of charges, more details in the reference to the type of charges when you say high risk cases, because for us that could, you know, it's a little different for us in reference to the type of cases that are placed on probation. Low usually aren't on probation, but moderate risk cases are. So as far as the actual type of charge, I would have questions about. And I pass with balance to Lauren.
Thanks. It seems like you guys work with community partners, and this is one of many models that we've seen. Some places have the program like in the prosecutor's office or in a separate entity. It sounds almost like you guys kind of have like a franchise where you work with a pre-standing community organization. I guess my question is if we do not have such a organization present in our community now, what can we do to still follow your model, or where should we be looking for those community partners? And I pass with Grace to Mike.
Thanks, Lauren. I have quite a few questions, Leanne. So if it's too many, I'm happy to do a one-off. But I wonder if you could talk about what the beginning phases, kind of a tangent to what Lauren said, of establishing those CBO relationships, like what that looked like, what community partners existed, how did you get them to, you know, want to participate in the program? And then you talked about, you know, when the harm is created and then the conference is initiated. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, is that initiated from the arresting officer? Is there a panel within the police department that decides, or how, you know, how you decide whether or not it's going to go to the restorative program? I'm a little curious about the data where you talked about, you know, where they're arrested. That's important to me, just having like that equity lens. I know sometimes folks create harm outside of like the neighborhood or area that they live in. So maybe just clarifying that. Yeah, I'm a little more curious about like the nature of the cases that you take, and thinking about like the historical nature of some of the low-level offenses and how those folks, or the rate of recidivism, it seems like those low levels may eventually turn into, you know, the felony or other moderate charges. So I wonder if, like, does it make sense to try to intervene at those low level, and maybe why you don't? Yeah, and then just the last thing that I wrote down was, do you have youth that participate on the conferencing, or is it all adults? And so with curiosity, I will pass to Parissa.
I don't have any specific questions. So with authenticity, I will pass to Josh Lopez.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. And I have to say, in reading your material, I was excited to see that you are true to your opening comment about imagining the possibilities and really going after those hard cases and having such success. Excuse me. So that being said, I do have a number of questions. what do you say to the opponents to RJ that say, you know, RJ actually promotes criminal activity in areas? Memos of understanding, do they have, or do you have experience in putting some sort of language in there that would basically be a plea agreement without using that language? In other words, if you're unsuccessful, the person who has committed the harm, the responsible person, has agreed that that person will plead guilty to some crime, be it a juvenile or an adult. What language do you suggest that we should use, or have you used in the past, to explain to people that RJ is not a program that's enabling poor behavior, bad behavior, whatever, you know, harm. It's not encouraging others to commit harm, or it's not enabling them. It's that it's language that shows that it's working with these people, like you talked about, focusing on the strengths. What kind of language do you suggest we use? We've heard before, but I'd like to hear your opinions on the importance of buy-in from law enforcement, and what could happen if law enforcement is not fully vested, or at least moderately vested into this this model, your model, or any other model that you have worked with. And the community aspect, I don't think is lost on anybody in this group. We come from a community where we share a border with DC and Maryland. And there are a lot of people that are here that have responsible parties that are not from our community. And they might not have any vested interest in this community. You hear people say, well, it's just a target for them. It's a target-rich community, so they come here and then they go back to their community. So what do you suggest that we can do to make those from not in this community feel that this process is essential for them to help this community heal? Because, as I said, a lot of them come from other communities. So I know that's a lot of questions, and I'll leave it at that. And with curiosity, I'll pass to Autumn. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Actually, Michael took my questions 1, 3, and 4, so I'm going to pass with kindness to Devanshi.
Thank you for the presentation. I align with Judge Lopez's questions around community and parties who've committed harm being outside the geographic community in which the community-based program is situated. I pass to David.
I agree with them about individuals who are not part of this community, coming from other communities. And that was one of my questions. But when you talk about seriousness or low seriousness of crimes, the crimes that we are experiencing now being committed by juveniles are mostly like bump and runs, GLAs, or a GLA hit and run along with an assault, and group shoplifting, several businesses, and things like that. And how does this program address those kind of crimes? And are these crimes low-level crimes, which would be part of the RJ process, or they're not? And I pass to Candace.
Thank you, Damon. Yeah, some of my questions have already been asked, so I don't have any more. And so I pass with curiosity to Bob.
Thanks, Candace. Picking up on Lauren's point about community-based organizations, how are they funded? And specifically, if in fact this kind of program saves a lot of money compared to incarceration, is the public sector asked to help support either forming community-based organization or expanding the current scope of activities of an organization? And with that, I will pass to Jen with authenticity.
Kind of further building off of Judge Lopez's comments, an interesting dynamic to our community is we also have Fort Myer military base. This might be playing kind of on my heart recently as I'm dealing with somebody who caused harm, who's actually being more stringently dealt with by the military than they were our own justice system. But we have this kind of intricate weave, because if you're charged here, that's also used against you in the military at times to further reprimand you or for you to have ongoing issues in your service. So Erica, you spoke to having some specific background with adult cases, and you guys have such a dynamic grouping across the country. I was wondering if either of you perhaps also had that military experience in any of the communities who currently have your programs. And I pass with energy to Amelia.
So thank you for this presentation. It was really wonderful. I particularly, a piece of it that spoke to me is when you were talking about how you target the crimes that are eligible for participation based on inequities in the criminal system. And I think a lot of us are here because we want to see fewer individuals involved in the criminal justice system and to reduce the inequities in the criminal justice system. And I feel like for me, there's a real cognitive dissonance between sort of that being something that I see as a real goal and the fact that restorative justice as a practice is focused on the person who's harmed. And so I really liked, that's kind of the first target, the first way is sort of targeting down who can be involved in restorative justice that I found really satisfying. But sort of speaking to that, I wonder if you could talk about how you see your program as, you know, maybe part of a constellation of solutions to kind of reducing involvement in the criminal justice system, and whether that's how you all think about that. And with excitement, I will pass to JP.
Ashlee and Erica, thank you very much for your time and the wonderful presentation that you did. We greatly appreciate it. And I have no questions based on all of the questions that everyone else has asked. So I will pass with balance to Ana Sofia.
I had a question and then I had to write down all your questions and now I forgot my question. So I have no questions. So I will pass with kindness to, oh, Leanne, back to you.
Cool. All right. And Ana Sofia, if you remember your question, let us know. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and pass it back to Ashlee and Erica and let you all tackle these questions.
Yeah. Question around type cases came up. So with cases that are suitable for restorative justice diversion would be cases that we said are serious and that have identifiable person harm. So assaults, burglaries, theft, theft of property over 1,000, something like, serious, burglary, robbery, and Erica, jump in if I'm leaving anyone out. And then, so there's also a question around the group shoplifting, like if that would be, or like, so like group shoplifting, vandalism, those type, or like theft of a chain store are not ideal for restorative justice diversion with this model, specifically because this is working to address people and people who've been harmed. And so when folks go in and steal from a store, a franchise, like there have been attempts to try to do these. I used to facilitate cases in Oakland, California, and it's hard for the company to send someone to represent, because it's not a person, it's the company. And then if they send the security officer, so it doesn't really get to, it's kind of like on that continuum where we talked about that Erica showed around like restorative justice, pseudo-restorative, it doesn't meet the need. That's not to say that other programs aren't needed for folks who maybe have substance abuse or vandalism or the grab and takes with the big shoplifting. But for this process, it's really geared for the serious cases where there's a harm, an identifiable person who's been harmed. All right, so I'm gonna so with the theme around the community, I'll start with there. There's a question around how does it get funded? How do you select a community partner? What are the ways that, like, historically, how have we like worked with different communities across the country? I will say that it's important. We really value not like just coming into someone's community and like we don't want to start like McDonald's and like have all these little pop-up, you know, franchises. It's really about like, we want to do our job so well that we should provide all the training, the technical assistance that's needed. And then like it's 6 years and we're like, you know what, y'all got this. You've made it your own and you're reaching out to other communities that are in the neighboring areas. And then there's creating this like natural organic spread of restorative justice. And so someone mentioned earlier, I think it was in this conversation, but like we want to work ourselves out of a job, right? And so we provide the training, technical assistance to get things started, to get things going so that it does become sustainable. One way to make it sustainable is that we have, one way that we've done it with resources is like having grants. So like having foundations and having it start with philanthropic dollars to be like the initial catalyst who will take the risk where maybe a community or maybe like a municipality may not take that risk, but to start it there and it gives the community-based organization a little bit of autonomy once it gets going, to then have investment from local jurisdictions. So that can be from the city, from the state. One of our sites in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, they are receiving VOCA funding, and they're the first site to receive VOCA funding for restorative justice diversion. And so ideally they're going to be receiving it again once the year ends. And so we're excited about the conversations that people are having around restorative justice, because it's opening up opportunities and using a process that really, it's really centered for people who've been harmed, and supporting people through a process of accountability. Yeah, Erica, you want to add anything to community or like the types of cases before I jump?
Yeah, well, I will just add that, right, like what Ashlee said, I mean, it's been really wonderful seeing how a lot of, for example, in California, the Board of States and Community Corrections just awarded about $2 million grant to the CBO that holds the program in Alameda in San Francisco. So that used to be money that was only tagged, like could not have been allocated towards a community-based organization. And that's actually just a trend we're seeing, where those restrictions, where money could only go to these specific entities, these state entities, are now being opened up to community groups that are working with those entities to offer services that weren't previously being offered, or services that are being offered in a different or better way. So that just is a trend that we're seeing. Impact Justice puts a lot of time and effort into preparing, you know, sample grant applications, like the language for those applications, and just really trying to support the process of securing what we call kind of pilot funding, because again, as Ashlee said, the process, like getting that pilot funding, showing that it's successful, and then seeing the way in which the state money follows is often, the jurisdiction money that follows that has been more or less the trajectory that we've seen. I mean, the part about not knowing of a community organization there that could do this work, I mean, that we rarely find ourselves in that situation, but there have been community organizations created for the purpose of offering this program. So, you know, it has been done like that. Oftentimes, again, you know, at least in that way, those who then work for that CBO hopefully bring that expertise and that knowledge and that wisdom and being from the community, et cetera, like to the work. If you're not going to just get that automatically by finding a community-based organization with kind of deep roots that already exist and hopefully have some expertise that can then be assigned to this work.
And to go along with that, there were some organizations that have like come together, right? So there wasn't one organization, but a couple of organizations. So maybe one organization was like youth focused, another organization they had a strong sense around supporting victims and survivors. Another organization had a relationship with law enforcement. And so what are the different ways that you can put together different folks who have a common interest for an organization? Or you can see if there might be someone who's been doing this and it just hasn't been named, but they've been doing something similar to like this within the community, or like around healing harm and addressing things or holding conversations. And so Yeah, and we also have, I think it was sent out to y'all with the, like an organization to like a selection, like how do we decide if this is the right organization? And so you can use the questionnaire from the toolkit on that to kind of like get a sense of like, what's the right organization to hold this work. Yeah, so I think our journey with different communities it varies. And it has original name for our toolkit was like moves like water. And so the way we talk about restorative justice is that it kind of moves like water. And so even our interactions and us being here right now, it was an email, just like a good sense, and like you all have been doing the work. And so the timing, like the fact that myself and Erica can virtually meet with you, like there's just certain things that kind of align. And so really using those moments when all the pieces fit together to act in a way that moves change forward. I think I addressed youth participation. Someone asked about youth participation. Erica, do you remember what it was? What the question on youth? Are youth part of the process? What's that?
I think that was a question.
Yeah, so we've had it. So like, let's say, well, if the person who's caused the harm is a young person, that young person would definitely be part of it. We've had young people have had like family members. That could be a sibling to be like a support. We've had them have their friends, because sometimes it can be a little awkward. So another question, like where folks are like, like this is soft, this is an easy way out. Like this is just like and then, but like, I don't know if you've ever had to sit in front of a group of people or a person that you've done harm to with your family around and community members to talk about it and to address like all of those emotions. Like you can't, and to like have to stand in your truth and take responsibility is a big deal. It's really, really difficult. It's like, it's the reason why we don't do it often, right? Because it takes a level of like, of courage and of strength. And so this process gets to that. I had a young person who had been on probation before say, Ashlee, this process is so hard. They were like probation, and I think it would have been easier for me to go on probation. And I was like, well, what do you mean by that? Tell me, I don't understand. He was like, well, because like they wouldn't have asked me these questions, and I have to really do some reflection on what I did, why I did it, and then I have to go say this in front of my family, and I have to confront the person who before I had no idea who this person was. Now I actually have to confront them. And so getting to the space where we can have those open and honest conversations allows for transformation. And when Erica mentioned earlier about the emotional impact, like, I mean, it makes sense. I'm not trying to sound too woo-woo and too California out here, but it's a real thing. When you have harmed someone, and when you feel and you begin to build that empathy that you've had, or like that you've noticed, and how your actions impact someone else, because oftentimes, especially with the folks that we worked with, the young people, they had no idea. They didn't know that the person, like, they couldn't pick up their kids for the whole day, and all of these other ripple effects. They didn't know that the person's terrified to now go to the grocery store, or, like they didn't understand those things. And by understanding those things and hearing more of the story and building empathy, that changes you. Stories change people, right? And hearing a real story from someone that you directly impacted from your actions changes people. And you can't, I wish I could put that in a box and then be like, yep, if you just have this, it's good to go. But like having to confront and do that work really creates a change. And then I wouldn't say it creates a change, but it creates a spark then to do the change. And the change is in the action, right? So it's more than just apologizing. You have to follow up with action. And so that's what this process is really supportive and good at, is getting people to follow up with the action, and then to support the person harmed. Like, how does this make you feel? And how does this address what happened? And most times, 90% of the time, folks are like, yes, this is what I needed.
One thing that just brings up, just because might as well address it right now since it's on my mind, this question around, right, like about Arlington and the fact that you all are kind of like a wealthy community, or the fact that there is crime that is happening in Arlington by individuals who might not be from that community, from your community. What Ashlee is getting at by speaking to the person who's done harm brings their loved ones, brings their support system. The facilitators are trained to reach out to bring in a community and then have them exist within a container that allows for that truth telling and for that facing of the harm. On some level, yes, this individual might not be from Arlington, but that is their parent, or that is their, like, someone who loves them. I'm sorry, one second. That is someone who loves them. So there is, like, this community aspect is not lost, because the process creates a container in and of itself in which a community exists, and in which you are being held accountable to not just the relationship that has been harmed by your action, like directly to the person you have harmed, but also the way in which that harm has impacted your relationship to your, like, community member, to your loved one, to your support system. And what is really wonderful about this process, and something that I only really appreciated coming to Impact Justice, having worked previously in a restorative space as well, as a part of that plan, it is not just that we have the person who did the harm repair the harm to the person who was directly harmed, right? That is central. That is how we orient the process. But we also have them repair harm to their loved one, because that relationship, when harm happens, it ripples out. Right? It ripples out to the person who's terrified. Why didn't you come home? Where are you? To your loved ones, to you may be your neighbor. So it is important, and facilitators are trained to bring those people in. So it is not the case that you're sitting there, feeling no level of accountability because you might not actually live in that neighborhood, but instead that ultimately you are, like, contained in a process where you are going to face your loved ones. And also, of course, that does not undermine the success we see, even when it is the case that somebody might not live directly in your neighborhood. However, we do, of course, encourage that you all look to take cases that actually are about individuals who live where you live. So that, on some level, just wanted to offer that about this notion that maybe things are lost because people are coming across the border.
And then around, like, the spectrum of restorative justice, and so someone mentioned, like, this might be one piece. Yeah, it would be great if there were, like, this is one part of this, but also having community restorative justice. So, like, having circles in the community where folks are being able to talk about things, process, having restorative justice in the schools. I know y'all are doing, or there's other committees doing work around that as well. All of those things built in. Having folks talk, like, there's transformative justice folks who talk about like systemic things and how to create pods and how to create communities so that young people aren't arrested in the first place, or, like, they even talked about having restorative justice off the grid. This is a specific, like, if someone is into the legal system, there's been an arrest, this is a process that they can use. And so when I mentioned off the grid, like, wouldn't it be wonderful if there were, like, people in the community who, before something happened, they're like, I'm gonna go to my neighbor who, because I heard that they know how to address a harm, or just, I'm gonna go to this organization because I know they have to address an issue, and that would be the way. One of the places that we're working, Nashville, that we're working with is that a neighbor had their car stolen, and they went through the restorative process. And I guess the neighbor had told their neighbors about the process. And unfortunately, another neighbor had their car stolen. And instead of the neighbor calling the police they first called the organization to say, like, hey, our car is stolen, can you help us? You helped our neighbor, can you help us with this situation? And we were like, wow, that's really good. We have not set up the system for that yet. But that shows you, like, the potential and how important it is when we talk about community, and we talk about relationships, and we talk about, like, it actually met a need where someone actually told their neighbor, and their neighbor then was inspired to go through this process, when before it wasn't even imagined that you could do something like this. Yeah, and so what do you say to folks who are like, this is not going to address, this is not going to keep communities safe. What if this is really soft on crime? What are some other things? Like, how do you convince people about how to do, or why do restorative justice? And I would say part of me is like, well, I don't convince people. The other part of me is like, well, what is the system currently doing? You know, like there's this tug of war with like the tension. But I would say is if the places, when I say when it moves like water, if folks are ready to do something different, if people and survivors have been asking for something and they have not been given it through the traditional system and through the traditional approach, then I think it's only fair that we try something different and that we do something that not only meets the needs of the survivors, but it can begin to repair some of the harm that's happening in the community. Things have to be addressed. And unfortunately, the process, the legal process is not encouraging people to address things or to take responsibility or to admit guilt because of the punitiveness of it. And so doing something different creates those opportunities where you can support survivors. So when people ask me, when folks are like really like, I do say that this is a process for survivors and survivors get their needs met. And that's a really good place to start with. And then I also just, as we're talking about survivors, being clear that like, I'm not exactly sure in Arlington, but I can say in Oakland, I can say in Nashville, and some other communities, that survivors of serious crime are often Black men, right? And they're not seen as survivors. And so it's important and it's vital that we have processes that address, we shift our lens of like who we see as a survivor, and that we also have programs and things that directly can speak to the inequity that we see within the system. There was another question.
There are some really good stats on that. So, and data about things that feel quite intuitive, which I think is always what's so nice about restorative justice. Again, like this whole, how do you convince? Oftentimes it's, what is expected in your own home when harm occurs, right? Like, how do we actually heal? And what is offered in the system that aligns with what we need as human beings. But I say that because a lot of research has been done about why victims need this type of process. And it is for all of the reasons we know, which is that when you have been victimized, you have questions, right? Whether it is why me, I should not have walked home late at night, I should not have worn that, you have questions. And so we see a reduction in post-traumatic stress symptoms when a survivor goes through a restorative process, a significant reduction in comparison to going through a criminal legal process. So oftentimes those who need more convincing, really focusing on how this serves, as Ashlee spoke to, survivors of crime, and the way that it serves them is so intuitive to like human beings and what we need when we have been harmed. That is a really good place to bring in statistics and data, because that has been studied more thoroughly than some other areas.
There was a question about the MOU. I just wrote MOU and I'm not sure if.
So that was what, do our MOUs say something if someone fails the process? So do we write into the MOU, that being unsuccessful in this process will result in you pleading guilty to some level of offense, which is not something we do. Essentially, if you are unsuccessful, then the case is returned and the district attorney's office can move forward and file charges if they so choose. So that is what happens if you fail or if you are unsuccessful.
Mm-hmm. And there's different reasons folks have success or in the program or not. Like, one, if they're like, I didn't do it, then we're like, you should not be in this process. This is not the process for you. And so we have to find maybe another diversion program or another process, but maybe you need the adversarial process. This process is not for you. Another could be if, like in our situation, like if young people moved out of the region or the county, they couldn't participate based on the MOU. It could be that it just is not a good fit, but we don't use any of the information that is shared if that's uncovered with the restorative process at all. So if the case were to be sent back, it's not, and nothing's shared back with the referring agency. Oh, there was a question on military, and I personally don't have any experience around that. Erica, do you have any expertise, legal expertise around that?
No, I don't. I wish I did. You know, I was trying to, because I didn't, I was thinking, okay, what are analogous, you know, circumstances? And I think what the question gets at is that at times, you know, you have multiple systems at play. And so triggering one, even if you have a way to kind of get on that off ramp, how about the other system that's still operating? And, you know, where I've seen that is in the school, is schools more, you know, where the school has a separate process and that event might have happened on like school property or the school was informed of it. And so unfortunately, I mean, even in those circumstances, that can be quite case specific. I know a lot of facilitators that will reach out to the school and look to work out some way in which successfully participating in a restorative process will mean that there will not be consequences for that same act that this person has now made as right as possible, that those consequences will not exist like from the school's side. But in terms of, you know, especially like two bodies that have like jurisdiction, that I have not seen.
Did we get all the questions? Is there another question that was like, that made me think about something else?
So, yeah, and I'm going to ask if anybody, you know, didn't quite get their question answered, do you want to elaborate or clarify or anything like that? You can go ahead and just unmute. Yeah, Michael.
Just a quick question around the initiation of the process and how who's responsible for that? Is that the arresting officer or is it like a case manager or?
Yeah, so it varies from county to county. So in a couple of our sites, they do have one site they're working with the police department to do direct referrals to the community-based organization. So it's happening like on a not at scale, but like on a very small level. With the oftentimes there's a point person, so with the district attorney's office or a state's attorney's office who's responsible who's overseeing the cases, and they refer directly to the community-based organization. Does that answer okay?
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Candace. I know you were talking about like how long the process can take, and you did give an example of the person harmed wanting the person who committed the harm to come and help with, I'm just gonna say garden. I don't know what you referred to as and we've heard from other presentations, essentially when the RJ process is kind of going off site. When that happens, is that being facilitated or someone else that's a part of the RJ going and a part of that, or is that based upon the amount of time that has been spent doing the RJ process that now both parties feel comfortable doing it off site? I was just curious how that works.
Yeah, so if a young person's making it right, let's say to the person harmed, and it's like they're not at school, it might be somewhere, a different location, getting permission from their parent or guardian about like that interaction. Even for the community-based organizations, there's a series of like paperwork that we do in coordination with the schools, in coordination with the parents, around being able to meet with the young person alone, because sometimes young people will not say everything if their parent is sitting right there, so they're a little bit more honest if you're able to sit with them by themselves and have the conversation, so they can feel like they can, you know, say whatever. So yeah, there's definitely ways to create that space. And then there's also the RJ coordinator may want to participate or may go with the young person. They may not have a ride there, so they may offer and provide that that support as well. So it's flexible. And some programs have it where someone like does the prep, they do the conference, and then you have another person who's like really skilled at resources in the community, who's going to work and connect all the people to the different places, who's going to support that young person with like the action plan and making it right, to getting like to the right organizations, you know, because even like building the planter, you have to go pick up the materials, you have to the timing. So there's another, they've had it where they have case managers, or some folks are now doing social workers to help with that piece.
Candace, I will say, I know that there are some questions we didn't get to. I'm looking over my notes, so I can speak to those also, but after you go, Candace.
Okay, no problem. Erica, you said something that brought up a question for me. You kind of gave the scenarios of what a sexual assault survivor might go through in their head, the internal victim blaming. Just any insights, lessons learned from implementing this with sexual or intimate partner violence cases?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ashlee, I'm going to let you take
Sure. So we're, like starting to work with folks with intimate partner violence. There's been a couple of cases that have gone for sexual battery, and it takes you can use this model like this. There's the elements are still there, but it's a it's more intensive process around the prep. There's more intensive process around the needs of the survivor, around the person who's caused the harm. It can happen, but yeah. So Sujata Baliga is leading our intimate partner violence and sexual harm work. She's on sabbatical. She's also not with Impact Justice, but she is like over that work. And so there's other organizations, the HIMSA Collective. They're doing work around intimate partner violence and sexual harm, and I believe Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. So we're kind of shifting away from that for right now, but it's definitely every place that we go, it's the question around like, if we're going to do this for around like assaults, then what about intimate partner violence? Because oftentimes people do not want to call the police. And so what do we do in those situations?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And of course, and as Ashlee was saying, right, dealing with the power dynamics. And so training to be able to create a safe and brave container in which you can have a restorative process. So yes.
We don't start there when programs are first launching.
Right. So some of the other questions. So curious about data. Curious about data as far as where they're, so we do, yes, we recognize that oftentimes we're going to have to look at what zip codes are coming, are disparately, I guess, showing up in what we are gathering as far as the data. So it's not just where you are being arrested. And some counties have better data than other counties. So it's not true that we can always get all the data that we want, but it would be where those individuals actually live. So if we can get data around where we are seeing that racial and ethnic disparity based on community and where the zip codes actually are, we're going to use that and make that a part of our assessment for eligibility purposes, and write that into the MOU.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and that's how you know what cases to start with. Like, we don't start with all the possible cases, because there may be like 500 or 600 types of cases. So you look at the data to select the cases that youth of color are primarily being charged for, and then you see, like, of those cases, where would we start, where you make the biggest impact, and then you'll be able to expand from there.
And we do, our model and the way we operate really centers that piece of it and does not feel as though it undermines being oriented around persons who are harmed. We believe you can hold both of those things at the same time. And so we do, and we think it's quite important to do that. Let me see. Importance of buy-in from law enforcement officers. That varies, right? Obviously, in sites where LEOs are actually diverting the cases, there has to be significant buy-in, and they're going to be a part of signing the MOU and very present throughout the implementation and then the actual operation of the the program. Sometimes with law enforcement assisted diversion programs, you see a lot of low-level cases, so it can be more difficult to ensure that there's not model drift around the offense types. And as kind of we discussed earlier, just about really making sure that we're not widening the net, and instead we're actually shrinking the system. So oftentimes having this diversion happen within the DA's office is a better way to ensure that we don't see drift with regards to the types of offenses that we believe are appropriate for this program.
Mm-hmm. And to add, I feel like some of the places that have had the strongest starts have had it when the different system partners, so the public defender, everyone's sitting around like similar to this, so sitting around the virtual table, having conversation, getting to consensus. What do we agree with? What don't we agree with? Where's the point, like where are points of tension, and using those points of tension to like dig deeper and figure out how to make the program unique for your community. And so there has been times where like everyone wasn't brought aboard, and then when you try to bring aboard after you've already made the decision and everyone's, then it's like, that can create tension too. So as much as possible, kind of just gauging where people are at, what's the direction. And it sounded like y'all talked about consensus earlier, but that's the same approach that we use with our assistance partners. So there's a role for public defenders, there's a role for police, there's a role for judges, there's roles for district attorneys, there's a role, and what's that role to support in moving this program forward?
Those are the only other questions that I was able to jot down that we didn't get to.
Yeah. No, I think you guys covered most of it, or all of, I mean, I don't see anything outstanding, but yeah, and there are a couple of places where I can see that there are some regionalized differences. So, for example, Lucretia talked about cases that would go to incarceration and probation, and I have a sense that in the Bay Area, at least, and in California in general, probation is a lot more geared towards serious cases. And so what probation looks like here versus what probation looks like there is kind of a different thing, because probation includes juvenile halls. And so the sentence to probation might even include some incarceration. So there's a little bit of a difference there in terminology and what that means. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So cool. All right. I mean, I think we've got most of this covered. Are there some last words you want to say to us about, as we're getting ready to go into our, as we're, intensive planning process on this, some particular words of advice or wisdom that you have for us?
Woo, okay. Words of advice. If you have a question, especially as you all are coming to consensus, please don't hesitate to bring that up to the group, even if you feel like you're the only person who has that question, or you might feel like the outsider, because that question or that piece of it's going to probably push and nudge the decision on what to do for the community in the best. You need that voice. And then if you can reach out to the community and start as you all are creating this, I think you all are doing this, but like maybe even having folks talk about like, what is restorative justice in the community? I think it's y'all you have different communities, but to continue that conversation, and dream big, go for it.
All right, cool. Thank you so much. It's time for our break. I don't know if you wanted to stay or if you wanted to just go on and do your thing.
I'm gonna go on and do my thing.
Okay, that's great. That is totally fabulous. I just want to be clear. So everybody, you can feel free to unmute and thank Ashlee and Erica for being our guests. We can stay in touch, so not worried about that. I think we have some things we can talk about among ourselves, and I expect we may reach back out. So thank you so much, Ashlee and Erica.
Really
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good luck,
Thank you.
y'all.
All right.
You
Thank
did a
you.
great job answering our questions.
Oh, our pleasure.
Yeah.
Take care. Have a great
All right.
evening.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you.
I'm going
Bye.
to pause,
Bye.
stop the recording, and